How are we doing, everybody? Welcome to Russell Heritage Golf. Today we're going to be talking about how do we release the wrists coming in towards the downswing and the golf swing. We've been talking about this subject area and we'll continue to talk about it in the through swing position. I think that my first tip is that, what we don't necessarily want to be doing, strangely enough, is becoming overly active with the hands, right? So, which seems strange because obviously when we talk about how do the wrists function, you would naturally think that your hands are going to be doing quite a lot. The problem if you start using the hands excessively and start rotating them too much around the angle of the shaft, then you're going to struggle for consistency in the golf swing. And good examples of this would be things like robotic devices that they've made to do things like club fitting. Obviously they don't have a large amount of manipulation around the actual shaft itself. It's more the arm working in space, which is what we're going to talk about today. The other thing that I would strongly suggest, which I'm actually going to start the video off in this manner, is that you can see the way that I've placed the cane down here on the floor, and that is basically representing as my target line. So if you work on this outdoors, great. If you work on it in the house, you want something which is going to be a few yards in length, right? Because the way that your wrists need to work in the golf swing, and when I talk about these videos in the detail as to what I do, what we're trying to just understand is how the body is moving to be able to swing the golf club on plane. That's basically it. So we would swing up towards the top of the golf swing. We would initiate with the downswing with a rotational movement, as I've discussed. And then what would start to happen is that as we continue to turn, the arm would continue to come down. But at this moment in time, not a huge amount is potentially changing, right? So my lead wrist would be down cocking slightly. But again, that isn't something that you're massively going to be consciously aware of. It's very much a natural phenomenon. So to this point, you don't need to concern yourself too much in terms of what's going on with the hands and the wrists in particular. But then what would happen is by the time we get to parallel, then what needs to happen now, and this is why I'm using this, so you can see the way I've placed the laser pen underneath the shaft of the golf club, is because as soon as I start to turn the corner here, right, so as soon as the shaft is no longer parallel placed, then it starts to come back down. I am basically just concentrating on getting the laser light pointing back down towards the ball to target line. Now, as long as the shaft of the golf club is pointing down towards the ball to target line, then that basically encourages the club to work on the correct arc coming in towards the hit. So, first of all, again, the amount of people that I come and give lessons to, and we talk about the concept of playing, the majority of amateur golfers have the wrong idea of the hit. They actually think you're supposed to be more underplaying than you actually are. So obviously at home, I can't tell you definitively how things are going to feel, but you would get a real strong sense for how you're supposed to hit the golf ball if you just concentrated on getting the shaft of the golf club pointing down towards your ball to target line as soon as the shaft starts to go past parallel. Really important exercise that is. So then the question would be, okay, well, hopefully we can't disagree upon the concept of playing, because it doesn't matter what sort of methodology, whether somebody likes swinging it flat, more upright, across the line, laid off. It's like, well, you can't ignore the concept of playing, so we have to agree upon that. The question therefore is, what is happening for us to get the club on plane? And the reality is, it's like what I've been talking about recently on the channel, it's the lead arm rotation. So if I kind of swing up towards the top and obviously mimic my golf swing, so you can see the way that I turn my arm in, so my watch face is now pointing not towards the target, slightly turned in. And as I swing up towards the top, you can see the way my watch face is pretty much, if I put it nice and tight, pointing up towards the sky. Now, as I initiate my downswing and I rotate, you can see the way the watch face hasn't changed its orientation. As I continue to come down, you can see the way, again, the watch face hasn't really changed its orientation. But now the club is going to go back onto the target line. You can start to see the way the watch would turn. So basically it's not here anymore, right? That would mean I'd get massively caught under plane and the club face would look like so. What has to happen is that my arm has to start to rotate, and you can see that this motion here is starting to get the shaft back on towards plane, but more importantly helping me get the club face square at the point of impact. So if we can agree upon this, then the idea is that what is this hand doing? Well, this hand is basically, again, we're going to not talk about the elbow, in terms of any sort of driving mechanism, but this hand is basically just like balancing a tray analogy, helping you keep the club on plane and just supporting the shaft weight of the golf club. We're not trying to do anything with this hand because it would have an adverse effect. We're not trying to force anything really with this hand. It's very much just a supporting mechanism coming into the hit. And it's like other drills and exercises that I've talked about, is that, you know, it's like kind of what I would suggest is you don't necessarily want to feel like you're massively using this hand coming into the hit, because it would have an adverse effect in terms of how the shaft would work through the ball. You know, imagine if you were kind of going to throw a frisbee or something, you wouldn't necessarily want to do it two-handed, you would just do it one-handed. And it's like the last drill in the left arm only. You can swing a golf club with a decent amount of club head speed, just one-handed. So that would be my real suggestion in terms of what is basically happening. What also can happen in the golf swing, and the reason why things will look different, and I've talked about this in a previous video, and I'll actually put the link in the video at some point, is that the reason why it looks so different with different professional golfers, you know, that some golfers look like they have a flat wrist, some golfers look like they have a huge amount of flexion. The main reason for this distortion in terms of view is due to depending on how open you are. So if I swing up towards the top and then I initiate my downswing with a rotation and I keep turning and I get the club to parallel placed, and now if I don't turn my shoulders anymore and I start to time that rotation, I would return back into a very similar position that I started in. But if I'm here, and this time instead of just dropping the club on the back of the ball, I continue to open my shoulders a bit more and then I allow the club to release, you can see the way my hands now look much further ahead of the ball. So it would delay the amount of rotation slightly. So depends how open you are, will potentially change the feeling, but the thing that we can't get away from is understanding the concept of plane. So if you're really uncertain into this video, then my strong suggestion would be go and buy a laser pen, go and attach it to the base of the club, get yourself a yardstick, you know, something nice and long, it could be a tape measure in the lounge, and just by the time the club starts to get past parallel, it should be pointing down towards the ball to target line. And that would be really, really beneficial. Flexion is the last little discussion. Flexion basically is the functionality of this on the lead wrist. The reason why you would flex is because we're not going to go into a vast amount of detail, is because it works that some professional golfers start to rotate their lead arm a lot sooner. And by doing that has a vertical effect on the shaft angle. So the idea of creating flexion is to counteract the amount that the lead arm goes downward facing. So you can, if you like people say, the idea of revving a motorbike to try and induce flexion, you can do that. Flexion will basically close the face more. That's what it's going to do. So for the majority of amateur golfers, I'd be slightly hesitant as to the idea of doing that, just because you'd have to have a certain club head speed to be able to close the face to still get an optimum in terms of distance. So it's not something that I generally talk about on the channel, because I think that you don't necessarily need to induce it to become successful. It closes the face, it has small benefits in the golf swing. It's something that would feel definitely stronger, the idea of flexing as opposed to maybe a flat wrist, but it's not a necessity, and hence the reason why I don't want to go into a vast amount of detail. If you're somebody who naturally induces flexion, fantastic. If you're somebody who doesn't and you're a little bit erratic, please don't necessarily think the idea that if I induce flexion, it will make me more consistent, because it just won't. If you can swing on plane, you'll be as consistent as you need to. Like I said, if that coincides that you didn't realise but you're actually inducing flexion, then fine. And I think we can come back to the idea of flexion again in the future. But for today's video, what I'm basically saying, how do the wrists work? Well, there's going to be a down cocking motion on the back of this wrist, and there's going to be a rotation around the lead arm. This hand, therefore, again, is obviously going to work very much similar. It's going to be following the lead hand in terms of its down cocking motion. And again, the rotation element coming in towards the hit on this hand. But the point is that you don't really want to be massively manipulating, and the wrists really want to stay pretty quiet. That's what I'm kind of saying in today's video. You know, you'll get a feeling in the hands. You'll feel the torquing on the shaft as it moves in space, which can often give us the idea that we think that we've got to use the hands a lot. In my opinion, a lot of this is an illusion based on how we look at the swing, and the idea is that actually you want to feel like you're trying to take the hands out of the swing a little bit more so than anything else. I think if you're in doubt, like I said earlier, anything upon this video, then I would strongly suggest that you go and get yourself a stick and start working on that concept of playing. Catch up with you again soon.